My name is Sarah, and I'd like to tell you a story. But it's not about me. It's about my boyfriend, John. Unfortunately, he can't tell it himself. Why? Well, you'll find out soon enough. John and I went to the same prestigious college. Many people were surprised by his personality because, on one hand, he was a tough and brutal athlete. His tattoos and toned body made him incredibly attractive. And on the other hand, he didn't let this stop him from being smart and successful. My boyfriend was tough and uncompromising. He clearly knew his goal in life, and he kept moving toward it, his eye on the ball. John was always full of burning ambitions. He was preparing himself for a career in politics. But one day, everything turned upside down. It happened at one of the football training sessions. John was just a monster on the field. He aggressively pushed rivals aside, and even his teammates were afraid of him. And then, when his next attack ended with a touchdown, he took off his helmet and didn't notice the ball flying toward him. John got hit on the head and fell. I immediately ran out onto the field, and when I picked him up, he looked at me in surprise and asked, "Where am I?" I thought my boyfriend had a concussion, and I took him to the medical center, but they said there was nothing wrong with him, just a minor bruise. He was recommended to lie up and have a rest, so me and John went home. When I was putting him to bed, he looked so confused. I'd never seen him like this before, so I left John alone and went about my business. I could hear him talking to himself in a low voice, and that was really weird. About an hour later, John came out of the bedroom and said he wanted some chocolate muffins, and I said I would run to the coffee shop to get them. But my boyfriend stopped me and said he'd bake them himself. What? I couldn't believe my ears. He'd never done any baking before, and usually he didn't think it was something a man was supposed to do. I didn't stop him, but I watched in amazement as he worked quickly and deftly in the kitchen. After only a couple hours, the fragrant pastries were ready. And you know what? I'd never tasted such delicious muffins before. I looked at John, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, you might have guessed that after the ball incident, my boyfriend changed dramatically. He left football, saying it was a rough and violent game. At the debate club, where he was a chairman, John introduced new rules that differed on a wider view for the respect and tolerance of other people's opinions. Yeah, and we even started spending more time together. We cooked unusual dishes, went to sales at fashion salons, and we even cried together over a sad movie. My boyfriend became so much more gentle and kind. I didn't know what had happened, but I really liked him this way. Once, he even wanted to take part in Comic-Con, and he was working on a cosplay for the longest time. I watched him working day and night, and I saw that he was happy as a clam. He put all his heart into the costume, and no wonder he took first place among all the cosplayers. John said that all his life he'd wanted to be a fashion designer. "Weren't you going to pursue a career in politics?" I asked, surprised at what he'd just said. "Have you lost your marbles?" my boyfriend replied. "That's so boring." This was the new, incredible John. Our coupledom moved to a new level when suddenly he disappeared. Just didn't come home one day. I was waiting for him all night, but he never showed up. He didn't come to college, and none of our friends saw him. I was sick with worry. Had something happened to my wonderful John? A couple of days passed, but he still didn't come back. He didn't return any of my calls or texts. In the end, I just couldn't stand it, and I went to the police. There, I told the officer everything that had happened, and he said that he would look for John. And so, a week passed. I kept waiting for the police to call and tell me terrible news. But something very different happened. John appeared out of the blue as suddenly as he vanished. He just came home and said he needed to rest before training. I didn't understand what was going on. When I asked where he'd been, my boyfriend just said he didn't remember. I hugged him, but John grinned and said, "Why are you being so lovey-dovey?" Yeah, it appears he'd gone back to how he was before, tough and brutal. He took up football again and threw away the costume with which he'd won at Comic-Con. "What a load of crap! How could someone wear this?" he said. "It knocked my socks off. What was happening to him? Where had he gone for a week? And how did he get that scar on his forehead?" I tried several times to get the truth out of him, but John just brushed me off and said it didn't matter. The main thing for him was to pass the exams successfully and get a job as an assistant secretary in the state Congress. I missed the John that I'd baked muffins with, and the John who'd sat with me in the park to watch the sunset. He was so happy then, and it made me feel happy too. whatever had happened, I just couldn't get through to him now, and I became determined to find out exactly what had happened. Then, one day, the officer who was looking for John called and said he had some information about my boyfriend. John spent the entire week at the mansion of his father, Senator Furlong. What was he doing there? I asked, but the officer replied that he didn't know, and he couldn't do anything else to help. I had to find out what was going on with my boyfriend, so I got in my car and I went to the senator's house. To my surprise, Mr. Furlong agreed to meet me. I'd never met him before, but I noticed how similar he and John were. The senator was just as tough and uncompromising. He replied that his son had spent the week at his mansion because he needed to focus before important exams. I asked why his son had changed so much since returning to college, but the senator replied that he didn't know what I was talking about. But where did he get the scar on his forehead? I was so pissed off. With my outburst, John's father suddenly became stern and asked me to leave immediately. He was obviously hiding something, but I just couldn't figure it out. What was he hiding? As I was walking to my car, someone called me. It was a girl, a little younger than me. She said her name was Kayla, and that we needed to talk, in private. We agreed to meet in the cafe nearby. About an hour later, we were sitting at a table together. Kayla said she was John's younger sister and knew what had really happened to him. And there, in the cafe, she told me his sad and incredible story. It turns out that, even from childhood, my boyfriend was soft and kind. He loved playing with dolls and wanted to become a fashion designer, but their father was a tough tyrant who wanted to raise a son just like himself. He was trying to educate John, punish him for what he thought was silly and girly, and when that didn't work, he turned to psychiatrists. They took little John to a psychiatric clinic where he spent an entire summer. And when he came back, he was entirely different, just like his father. Apparently, they brainwashed him by hypnosis and medication. The senator was rejoicing that his son had started to live up to his expectations. And as time went on, John graduated from high school and went to college. But when a ball hit John's head, he became his real self again. His true identity was released. But his father found out. He saw a news article on the Comic-Con event and got very angry. He took his son away and gave him back to the psychiatrists. John had an operation, electrical stimulation of the cerebral cortex, all so he could be turned back into what his father wanted him to be. When my boyfriend was taken to the psych ward, he was crying and begging his father not to do this to him. He was truly happy with how he was living, but his father didn't listen. Kayla finished her story and asked me to save her brother because she just couldn't. Her father wouldn't let her go far and watched over her like a hawk. I was, of course, shocked by what I'd heard. Such cruelty to his own children. It just blew my mind. I promised Kayla I would do everything I could, and I told her I would never leave John. On the way back, I thought about what she told me. How could the senator sacrifice his own son's happiness? And just so he could get John to become a copy of himself. I started thinking, how could I get John back to his real self? Could I go to the police? But Senator Furlong was in such a powerful position. They probably would never even listen to me. I threw my hands up in such total despair, and then a sudden idea came to me. When I got back to college, John was at a football training. I waited until it was over, and my boyfriend took off his helmet. I'm sorry, John, but I have to do this to you. I took the ball and hit his head with it as hard as I could. The impact knocked him down to the ground. I waited for him to get up, give me a hug, and go make muffins. But John just looked at me and said angrily, "Sarah, are you out of your mind? What do you think you're doing?" I realized my plan hadn't worked. Apparently, the operation he'd been given was much more effective than hypnosis, and I couldn't fix it with just a hit from a ball. John scolded me for being so irresponsible and frivolous, and in that moment, I looked into his eyes and saw all the pain and despair he felt. John's real self was hidden somewhere deep inside, and he could see what I was doing. He understood. So please, I'm asking you to share this story with others. Maybe the senator will realize that he's torturing his child, and maybe, just maybe, he'll let John be himself. After all, everyone deserves to be happy.